Please welcome Kentucky's Secretary of State Michael Adams, being interviewed today by Grant County Clerk Tabatha Clemons as they discuss how Kentucky is leading the way on secure elections.
So thank you for having us. I'm happy to be here with you and introduce our Secretary of State, Michael Adams, who I've had the pleasure of working alongside the last several years in his first term as our Secretary of State. And the Kentucky County Clerks Association has been able to have a lot of interaction with Secretary Adams over the last 3 years, and we're very fortunate to have him as our secretary. So please help me welcome Secretary Michael Adams.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thank you.
Now, I let Secretary in on a little clue that he had a fan in the room today. My son is with me today, and he has went to the Capitol with me on a few occasions, and the secretary took him to the basement of the Capitol to show him the robot that exists. So if you don't know, you've learned something today. There's a robot down in the basement of the Capitol, and it's Michael's signature pin. So
I've been fully automated. I'm totally unnecessary at this point. Robots do my job.
But what he doesn't know is his polling numbers in the room went up drastically today because Jeffrey's here in the room with us. So we'll have those poll numbers when we finish up.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Have them with us.
So we want to talk to you about some things facing the Secretary of State's office and our state as a whole today. And we're going to start off with elections because it's on everybody's mind. It's in the forefront of what county clerks do. Something that used to be seasonal, as recent as when I came into office in 2015, you know, you had election seasons. May was election season, leading into it, maybe April. And then October, November was election season. Now election season, as Trilly and I and Leslie have learned over the last couple years, it's a full-time job, just elections alone. So since Secretary Adams is our chief election officer, I'd like to get his thoughts on the last couple weeks election and see what he thought about our process here in Kentucky.
Well, thank you, Tabatha, and of course, thank all of you for being here today. A few takeaways from our election that just concluded last week. First, the good guys won. I don't mean a particular candidate or party. What I mean is on the right side of truth, people who put out truthful information about our elections, people like Tabatha, our clerks, my office, the State Board of Elections, the governor, people who told the truth about how our elections are fair and free, about how the machines are not rigged to produce certain outcomes for somebody. The good guys won. The bad guys lost. Thank you. The bad guys lost. The bad guys who have been bombarding me and Tabatha and our election officials with spurious open records complaints and demands to get election records going back many, many years, people that have been showing up randomly to our offices, making accusations, the people that have put out falsehoods on social media that have spread pretty virally, the people that have sued us for recounts, people that lost by 20, 30, 40, even 50 or more points, calling us crooks, saying that we stuffed the ballot boxes. Those people lost. They were on the ballot on Tuesday and they lost. We had a high turnout, and every vote that was cast was a vote of confidence in our election process, Republicans and Democrats. So that to me was a big shot in the arm. To put this in perspective, in 2020, which I think Tabatha would agree with me was absolutely hell on earth for election officials, that was a real curveball. In 2020, we only had 2 county clerks quit. We had 2 that said, I just can't do this anymore, and I'm gone. This year we had 9. And this is a year when we're all on the ballot, right? And so they just had to wait till the end of their term in December. But even that was not soon enough. We had 14 retire and 9 just quit for a total of 23. 23 of our seasoned election officials leaving their post. And look, they've earned it. I'm not casting aspersions, but to go from 2 resignations to 9, in 2020, we thought we had survived and it was going to be easy from here on out. It wasn't. Somehow this year was worse. Somehow this year was even harder than 2020 was. And it's because largely of the misinformers. And a lot of this is directed from out of state. There's a pillow salesman in Minnesota who's behind a lot of this, and unfortunately, people are getting their information from YouTube provocateurs instead of people like us. But as we showed, I think in this election, increasingly people are realizing that they're being sold snake oil and that we are the legitimate voices of the election process. So that's some good news. We should all be really proud about that. The second takeaway is that early voting works. Early voting, surprisingly, was a pretty controversial issue when I implemented it via emergency powers 2 years ago. To me, it's just a no-brainer. If you go back and look at our first two state constitutions in the 17 and 1800s, they actually had, as a matter of constitutional right for you, the voters, you had 4 days to go vote. You got to pick 4 days to vote. And that makes sense. We were a rural population. Well, guess what? We still are, largely. And we're also a busier population. Fewer people proportionately today work on the farm and have freedom with their hours. More people work for somebody else than back in the 1800s. For 170 years, the legislature had the authority, if they wanted to expand beyond one guaranteed day, but they chose not to. That was long overdue for revisitation. So we saw that the early voting was really popular. Over 250,000 voters took advantage of it. Our lines would have been a lot longer on Tuesday if we hadn't had 250,000 voters take advantage of it. Here's the part that I'm the proudest of. I had Democrats say back in 2020 that I was trying to help the Republicans by expanding voting. I had Republicans say I was trying to help the Democrats by trying to expand voting. I wasn't. I was just trying to make it safe for people to vote in a pandemic by helping us all avoid crowds. Well, what we saw in the early voting is the Republicans, by registration, we don't know how people voted, of course, but by registration, more Republicans used it than Democrats. But it was very, very close. It was about a 2-point edge. Well, that's very close to what we have in voter registration, a narrow edge for Republicans. So in other words, early voting didn't help one party or the other party. It just helped the voters. They voted in the same kind of proportions they were going to vote anyway. It just made this way more convenient for them. I often tell people I know of at least one person who normally doesn't vote, who now votes because it's easier and she can vote on the weekend. That's my own mom. The mother of the Secretary of State doesn't normally vote, but she does now because she's got freedom around her schedule at JCPenney to figure out a time around when she's on the clock to go vote. So the second lesson, I think, is that early voting works. The third lesson, though, is it's not enough. And I'm not advocating that we expand days. Because look, I'll just tell you, we had 4 times as many people vote on Tuesday as we had vote in the prior 3 days of early voting combined. So when folks say that we need more days to vote, I disagree. I don't think that if we added more days to go vote, it would make a big difference on election day with respect to lines. I think what we need is more locations on election day. So I testified on Thursday to a committee in the General Assembly with some suggestions for how we might achieve that. And to be clear, I don't think we had long lines in Grant County or in the vast majority of our counties, but we had some that had long lines. I do think that we need to have, and I'm a big believer in local control for your county election plans, for education, for everything. But I do think we need some sort of standard, some type of backstop where we can't have an over-reduction of plans. We had some pretty big counties, the collar counties of Jefferson, large populations with lines of an hour to 2 hours to vote. I think it's important that we have, that we avoid an over-consolidation of locations. I love the vote centers. I'm real proud that we introduced that to Kentucky, but I don't think that we can post-COVID, always reduce 100 locations to 5 or 6. That's just too much. So I offered the legislature a couple of ideas for how we might tackle that.
So one of the, I feel like one of the reasons that there was some lines on election day was attributed to the ballot and the length of the ballot. And I think that some people, as much as we all try to educate them, whether you're campaigning for yourself or for a loved one or a friend that you serve with, you're out trying to educate the voter was educating themselves while standing in the ballot booth or the voting booth. And it was basically like, who wants to be a millionaire? Let's phone a friend.
Yeah.
You know, so I'd like to hear your thoughts a little bit on maybe what we can do collectively to ensure that we don't see ballot links as long as we've seen. And I know that there's a Supreme Court ruling about that, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, if there are things that we can do, I'd love to hear them, but this is kind of out of our control. The number of races on the ballot isn't decided by the clerk or the Secretary of State.
Right.
It's in the Constitution. This was a year that we had a large number of candidates. We had U.S. Senate, U.S. House, half the legislature, all the House, half the Senate, every county office in the state, almost every city office, almost every judicial office, a lot of those too, school boards, and the 2 amendments. And the amendments were long and complicated, but they were just a sliver really of that longer ballot, maybe a quarter of the ballot as a whole. I'm not going to blame anybody for this. I mean, I guess I'll blame the Supreme Court. That's about it. The Supreme Court ruled in Ward versus Westerfield in 2019, right before I took office, that notwithstanding what the statute says, that the Secretary of State and the Attorney General can't agree to some summary language to put in plain English for our voters on the ballot what exactly the amendment does. We have to now, under this ruling, unanimous ruling by the Supreme Court, list every single word of what that amendment does, every change that it makes. And in the case of Amendment 1, it was 744 words long. And not to brag, but I'm a constitutional lawyer. That's how I made my business before I became Secretary of State. I had trouble reading the darn thing. So my gosh, I mean, your average voter going in there and trying to understand that, to their great credit, they really tried.
They did.
And they spent 10 minutes in there trying to understand it. And that was a factor, I think, in the lines. But we had 100 counties with no lines and 20 with some lines. So I don't know that we can blame the ballot entirely for it.
Sure.
But the upside is that in 2023, we're not going to have a long ballot. We're only going to have 6 offices on there. We may have a lot of candidates. We may have a 2-page ballot for the Republican primary for governor.
Sure.
It's going to be a long list. But it's just 6 offices. So we're not going to have the listing of all 3 branches of government and amendments. It's going to be a shorter ballot next time. That will help.
It will. So many of you, after Election Day's over, you get to go, shoo, Election Day's over. Those of us who sit in the seats of County Board of Elections, some sheriffs in the room will share that responsibility with the clerks. But we're still working on election reports and all sorts of certifications and downloading our information from the electronic poll books. So why don't you share with our folks here today some of the election reporting that the Secretary of State is involved with that coincides with State Board of Elections and the certification process?
One of the urban legends that I spend just about every day trying to knock back is the notion that we use the internet to count our votes. Well, number 1, that's not legal. But number 2, why in the world would we do that? What a dumb idea. I don't know anyone that would do that. Why would you do that? We don't do that. It's almost like something from Mayberry or Petticoat Junction. We look at how we process vote count in Kentucky. It's very old-fashioned. So we start with you all. We start with our precinct election officials, who, by the way, are evenly divided by party. One nice thing about our system in Kentucky, and I think one of the reasons that we have relatively high confidence in our elections compared to what other states have, is that we're bipartisan. Not just the governor and me working together during COVID, but on down the line. We've got a State Board of Elections of 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans. By law in every county, we've got a bipartisan Board of Elections, the county clerk and the sheriff, and then 1D and 1R that the 2 parties locally nominate. Every single location that people vote at by statute. It's right there in the law. You've got to have a mix of Ds and Rs. And I've never seen a situation where a D poll worker tried to cheat the R or vice versa. They work together in good faith. And most of them are repeat customers that come back and re-enlist every year. They know what they're doing.
They even share food in our county. They bring,
Yeah.
they share their snacks.
Yeah,
with
there's a
each
mutual
other.
respect there. People
There
put
is.
the partisanship aside. They just want to be part of democracy. And so the polls close and the precinct workers push the button to zero out the machine so it can't take any more votes. It prints a little tape. Well, in this case, it was a long tape. They tape, it's so hokey, but they tape that tape to the window of the door of the building where people are voting. And of course, they also provide that information to you. Mm-hmm. They drive it down to the courthouse and give it to you, and you add up all the data, and you send that to us. And by the way, it's not an immediate thing. The deadline by statute is y'all have until Monday at noon following the election to get that to us. And so we're still actually getting these in now. We've got a few left that are stragglers. But we get those in, and then y'all send them to us by fax. You don't email them to us. You don't put them on a Dropbox website. You literally fax them. We're big on fax machines. I mean, we should do pagers at this point, right? That's how behind we are. But it's a good thing because it's secure technology. No one can hack a fax machine. So the counties, each 120 of them, each fax in the results to us. And then y'all sign them.
Right.
And if it's not signed by the Democrat and the Republican and the clerk and the sheriff, we don't count it because it's not legal. So we have to have a bipartisan agreement as to every vote cast in that county and that it's accurately tabulated. That process takes about a week. Then our office spends a couple of weeks going through it ourselves, making sure that it's accurate. Sometimes it's not. Actually, almost always there's something wrong. It might be a transposition error, or it might be a missing precinct or a missing write-in or something, usually pretty technical. And it's never been enough to overturn the outcome of an election, but we still want it to be right. So then we spend 2 weeks doing nothing but checking these numbers. And then we bring them to the State Board of Elections, and then they go through them. The board members go through them, the staff go through them, and they triple check them, make sure that they're right. So every vote in Kentucky goes through that same process to make sure that it's right. There's not really an avenue for anyone to hack in there and change anything. We've got machines that are just ballot scanners. They're not electronic machines. We got rid of those. They're just like the machines when you were in high school and you did a multiple choice test on Scantron paper. That's the kind of technology that we're dealing with. And that sounds kind of crazy that we've upgraded to a lower level of technology, but it makes sense because that gives us the capacity to do, if we need to, a recount or an audit, to check the hand count against the machine count, make sure it's right.
So one of the things that I was very appreciative of, and I know many of my fellow clerks were appreciative of from the Secretary's office, was a rumor control page that he launched on his website to help us combat some of the falsehoods that have been spread about our election process here in Kentucky. And I really wanted to give you the opportunity to highlight some of the things that are on the rumor control page to give to our fellow elected officials who may also hear people at the coffee table, coffee shop, where they gather, talking about our elections are rigged. What are some key talking points that they can share with constituents back at home?
Well, number one is that we don't connect our machines to the internet. And I say it all day, every day. But I will tell you this, I've learned something in this office. We can do the best job that we can being on TV and getting out to the public. But the truth is, voters trust you more than they'll ever trust me or the governor or anyone in Frankfort, just because they know you. Your local officials, they know you, they trust you. They went to school with you, they go to church with you, they see you at the grocery. Y'all have an advantage I'll never have. We did some polling a couple of years ago, and we found that we had 75% approval, but y'all had 85% approval. All things being equal, they'll just trust you more because they know you in a way they'll never know me because I'm some guy on TV, right? So I'm especially hopeful that you all will take some of these points and share them locally because you all have credibility I simply just can't have because I'm not a local official. But the number one thing to persuade people of is that we don't connect our machines to the internet. We actually made it a felony this year to do that. I don't know how you would even do it. There's no modems in the machines.
Right.
But even if there were, if someone tried to do it, then they would go to jail. They would go to prison. I think that's the number one thing that people sell out there that's false. There are other kind of more minor things that people say, but here's the thing. When you knock down one rumor, a new one takes its place. Let me give you an example. So the folks that clamored for us to get away from electronic machines, and I agree with them, get away from electronic machines to go to paper ballots. Well, we did that. We spent tens of millions of dollars doing that, and I'm glad that we did it. And then the same people that demanded that we do it said, oh, we can't trust these new machines. Adam's changed all the machines on us. We got to check the tech. Well, we did check the tech. Every single machine in Kentucky was checked at the state level and the local level before it was ever offered to a voter for voting. So we did check it. We knew it was going to be accurate. So we had people that ran in the primaries and lost by large numbers, and they demanded recounts, and we did, I think, 3 of them. And every single time, the count was verified. So then they changed their argument to say, well, you almost have stuffed the ballot boxes to make the count match. So I want to be humble about my ability to persuade and my ability to reach people and knock down dumb stuff like this, because once you debunk them, they'll come up with some new argument. And then you'll chase that one, and then there's always another one.
I agree. So you mentioned recounts, so let's go there for just a moment. Earlier this summer, the county clerks testified on the challenges that come with candidates who are successful in their elections. But then there's those who are not successful who request recounts, and you've already mentioned some of that. But could you discuss the issues that surround the process and any reform suggestions that you have at the top of your mind today that might be worth considering in the future?
So in 2020, we had a candidate that lost by about 19 points, and he demanded a recanvass. And we have a brand new recount law, which just passed last year and had never been used before. So in 2020, the recanvass was the way that you would check the tech, if you will, and check the count. So I didn't think it was appropriate to ask the Jefferson County Clerk, who'd been through a brutal election year, to drop everything and do a recanvass for a guy that lost by 20 points. But he had a right to it. It's in the statute, and so she did it. I went to the legislature and asked them to close that loophole and say, you got to be within a margin of 1% before you start wasting government resources for a recanvass. Well, a recanvass is relatively easy to do. It's just checking your numbers again. It's not like a full-blooded recount, which is very labor-intensive and time-intensive. So once we closed the loophole on the recanvass, everyone started using the recount. We actually have a law in Kentucky. It's been in our books for about 100 years, called the Election Contest Law. If you have evidence as a candidate, if you have evidence of fraud, if you have evidence of malfeasance or corruption, or even just an innocent error, an innocent mistake, administrative or otherwise, you've got a right under the law to contest that election, to challenge it. The people who sued for these recounts didn't have any evidence. They didn't have any legit allegation. All they had was conspiracy theories, and so they misused the recount law in place of a contest because they couldn't qualify for a contest. They used the recount law. I think we need the same kind of 1% margin of outcome to apply to the recounts because they're far more taxing on you, the county clerks, and our courts and others. Let me give you some real-world problems for all of us. One of the talking points these folks use is that, well, it doesn't cost y'all anything. The campaigns pay for the recounts. Well, that's kind of misleading because once they get in, then they start asking the taxpayers to pay for stuff. There's still one ongoing in Oldham County, and the plaintiff who lost is asking that taxpayers pay for the cost of security. The actual count itself, they'll pay for, but they want the taxpayers to pay for the security. Well, that was many thousands of dollars that they just want taxpayers to have to eat. In LaRue County, there was a school tax levy on the ballot, and they couldn't use their machines for the levy because they were locked down for a frivolous recount. They had to go out and pay for new machines. They hit the LaRue County taxpayers. So there are real harms to taxpayers with these frivolous lawsuits, but there's a huge harm, I think, to us as well, and it's part of the abuse that's built up that's led so many clerks to quit. And that's bad for all of us.
It is. You know, we had our banquet last night at the County Clerks Association, and to see all of these clerks line up, 20 plus across the stage, all retiring, was a really sad moment for many of us. Some are moving on, doing new things. Others are going to go home and take care of grandchildren, which I'm glad that they get the opportunity to do that. But when you look at that much knowledge base and experience and wisdom walk out the door, it leaves so many of us with a hole. For those of us who are amongst the ranks, being newer to the office, and all of the ones coming in that are brand new, there's not many veterans county clerks left out there. Those who served for over 40 years, like Sue Carroll Perry in Shelby County, those clerks are not sticking around now, and it certainly leaves us to wonder what can we do to help retain people. Not only in our offices, many of us have hiring issues, whether it's at the jail or the road department. We all see that as an issue. But what do you see in the 2023 legislative session to be able to help not only combat some of these rumors that we've all dealt with, but also to help retain good elected officials in our county clerk positions?
Well, let me step back to your point about the clerks. Here's some bad news and some good news. I'll go with the bad news first. The bad news, to your point, is we've had a huge level of attrition this year. 23 out of 120, that's a lot. And every time a clerk retires who's done it for a long time and some new person comes in, if there's a mistake made, these people that are on our heels on, quote, election integrity, who have no integrity themselves, they're going to say, see, the system's broken, the system's rigged, I told you so. So that makes us pretty frustrated to see good people driven out this way. But here's some good news. In a lot of states, you've got a lot of kooks and cranks running for these jobs, running for Secretary of State, running for county clerk. These are people who should be allowed anywhere near the election process. We didn't have that here. In almost every instance where you had a clerk retire this year, that person is being followed by a deputy clerk or an election chief, someone in the office itself who's well qualified to step into the shoes of a predecessor and smooth a smooth transition and well-run elections. And so Kentucky has really dodged a bullet, at least so far, on this point. So in 2023, I don't want to overstay my welcome in Frankfort and always have a big bill every single session. So far we have. But I do think that voters want to see this. I think they want to see improvements on access. I think they want to see improvements on security. And you're never done. This is a race with the finish line. There's always more that you can do to make the process better than it used to be. Let me give Kentucky some props here for a second. We are unique. There's something different in the water here. We're the only state in America that is leading on election reform. We're the only state in America where you've got Republicans expanding voting access. We're also the only state in America where you have Democrats voting to improve election integrity. That's it. It's just us. If you look at red states in our region, they're making it harder to vote in the name of security, which is not necessary. I'm all for security, but you don't have to make it hard to vote to have a secure election process. And at the national level, what you saw the last 2 years is the other political party has tried to overturn our laws that we've passed here the last 3 years, overturn our photo ID to vote law, overturn my ability to get our voter rolls cleaned up, overturn our ban on ballot harvesting, because they want to nationalize elections. They want to undo the things that we've done for security. And so the other party cares a lot about access, and that's great. I agree. But they're trying to undermine security in the name of access. And so I'm here to say kind of a pox on both of those two houses. It's better to do it the way that we've done it, where we're having bipartisan majorities come together in good faith, and Democrats and Republicans, clerks, that's happening, legislators, that's happening, me and the governor, that's happening. I think that's part of why we've made more changes in 3 years than we made in the 100 or 200 even years beforehand. We're a conservative state. I mean that with a small c. We're temperamentally conservative. We don't like change. To change that much that fast and have the population accept it and welcome it and take advantage of it is really unusual in Kentucky history, and I think it's because we've been bipartisan about it. So I've already started conversations. I did a couple of months ago with legislators of both parties, things that we can do to improve the process. My priorities are number one, to have more voting locations on election day. If you break down the numbers of this election, we had about 5% vote by absentee ballot, and that's actually far fewer than the number of voters that qualify. We have way more voters that qualify for it. I saw a video of a lot of ladies and old men in wheelchairs. Well, you don't have to vote in person. If you're in a wheelchair, you can vote absentee ballot, but that's our culture. We love voting in person, which I respect. That's my job, is to respect that culture. So we're 5% absentee, we're 1% in-person absentee, those 6 days before early voting. We were roughly 17% early voting. And then doing the math, it's about 77% that's left that voted on election day. I want voters to have options. It's not my decision what day they ought to vote. My whole purpose is to give them choices. That's what elections are, they're choices. But if people want to vote on Tuesday for tradition reasons or any other reason of convenience, it's our job to make sure they have more locations and they can do that. So as I said, I've got a couple of ideas. One is to have some sort of external check on the ability of counties to significantly reduce their number of locations. Another would be to develop some kind of a formula in the statute that says you've got X many voters, you need X many locations. I think those are both doable. I'm not really sure how to design it, but I'll leave that to the legislature. That's my biggest priority, because I just don't want to have the kind of turnout we're going to have, I expect, in November 2023 with a competitive governor's race, all these interesting races on the ballot that are getting more and more attention. I don't want to have the lines that we had this past Tuesday.
Sure. One of the things that I love as a county clerk about early voting is that it gives us the opportunity to have hands-on experience with our poll workers prior to the big day of election day when you have the 70% show up. It gives us hands-on experience to train them even more intimately than we do, which we're required to do prior to election day, and have them sworn in as election officers. But the ability to be there when they're checking in voters and making sure that they're saying the right things, and that they're verifying the photo IDs that we're scanning, that they're making sure that they have the correct address so that we can assist them in getting the correct ballot style. It's really really has lent well to having a much smoother election day and election morning, because those who serve in early voting, we can strategically place them in our election day locations, and they can kind of be leaders with those who just serve on election day. So that's worked out really nice for county clerks, so we appreciate that. One thing that I want to bring up is the funding that we've been able to secure from the legislator and the governor signing into law in the 2022 session. I know that there was meetings that I attended with Shelley and JC from the Judges Association and the Magistrates and Commissioners Association, and then Todd from the Judges Association, in order to start the conversation. You know, there was finally money in Frankfort, which is something that, Jim, frankly, we hadn't seen in a long time. So being able to go into some meetings and ask for some funding and then be successful. I'd love for you to share with us your thoughts on the $25 million, and if you think that maybe we should go back and ask for some more.
Well, if there's any one thing I want folks to remember when they leave, it's that you should come ask us for money, because we've got it and we want you to have it. Our office has successfully requested $20 million in federal funding, and don't give me credit for that. You can thank President Trump and the Congress. They provided this money in 2019 and 2020 for us to be able to upgrade our systems. That's about been spent. We do have, as Tabatha mentioned, $12.5 million this fiscal year, and then again the following fiscal year, that the legislature gave us. This is free money. This is for you to petition. Just send it to me and the Board of Elections. Ask us for the funding. We're giving out millions of dollars in federal funding, and now we have the state funding offer as well. This is tied to something. It's tied to a mandate. Effective January 1st, 2024, the last day of my term, every vote will be cast on...
Your first term.
We'll see about that. But every vote in Kentucky will be cast on paper, every single one. We made that a goal initially, and now that's actually in the law. But we don't want to just have an unfunded mandate on you all. We want to actually give you the money to pay for it. So we do have funds that have been allocated to us by the General Assembly and the governor. Please apply. Please send me a letter and ask, and tell us what you need the money for, how many machines you need, what machines you have now, how old they are, how many precincts you have, how many locations you're going to have, because we've got this pot of money. And as I've told a lot of you individually, y'all are all competing with each other. So please send us those letters and ask for those funds.
And there will be a process for that, I'm sure, that we will all be informed about. So don't bombard him today. They're sitting I would be sitting back there typing you an email already asking for money. But I'm sure his staff will reach out to us and ask more about that. How are we on time? Okay. So last night I went around the room at the County Clerks Association asking, does anybody have any questions? They want me to ask the secretary tomorrow. So I did get one, and we're going to end on a little funny note. So one person came up to me and they said, I think your final question should be the question that's been on my mind since he took office. I said, okay, what's that? And they said, do you ever not wear a suit? Are you on the beach in a suit? Is that your, you have a suit for everything. They always see you in a suit. So that was the last question that they wanted me to ask you today was, when you go to the beach, do you wear the suit with your umbrella drink, or do you finally... I don't go to the beach. That takes care of that problem. Oh, well. Just for the job you want. That's what I was always told, and so I tried to do that. Yeah, well, we definitely appreciate your professionalism, and we've been very fortunate. I showed up on a whim at the secretary's office, and he was more than happy to show us around and introduce and educate my children about Frankfort and the policies. So if you're ever there, I'm sure that he would love to see you. Absolutely. Stop by and say hello to him. And more than anything, I just want to thank you for your innovation and leadership that you've been able to bring to the office. And as a county clerk, it's nice to know that you and your staff are accessible to us. We may not always see eye to eye on every topic or issue, and that's just the way that things are. But there's always a door there that's open, and we appreciate you having a listening ear for us. So pleasure. We really appreciate everybody's attention and time today. Let's give Secretary Adams one more round of applause. It's great to see you all. Thanks so much.